Franklin Delano Floyd was born June 17, 1943, in Barnesville, Georgia, to Thomas and Della Floyd. He was the youngest of 5 children. Just after Frank's first birthday, his father, who was an alcoholic, died from kidney and liver failure. His mother struggled to provide on her own and ended up having to give the children up. In 1946, Frank and his siblings were put into a care home in Hapeville. There, Frank was bullied by other children for being feminine and later reported to be sodomized with a broomstick at the age of 6. He also received harsh punishments from the staff. As a teenager, he got in trouble and he would often get caught in fights and stealing. In 1959, he was put in the care of his sister Dorothy after he ran away and broke into a nearby house to steal food. After his sister kicked him out, Frank travelled to Indianapolis to find his mother Della, only to learn she had become a prostitute. He then asked his mother to forge legal documents allowing him to join the US Army in California. However, Frank was discharged from the army 6 months into his service after discovering he was in fact underage and that his papers had been forged. After he could not locate his mother again, he travelled as a drifter. On July 2, 1968, his mother Della passed away. She was buried in Graceland Cemetery, Chicago, Illinois. At the age of 16, on the 19th of February 1960, Frank broke into Sears department store in Inglewood, California, where he stole a gun. Police immediately responded to the alarm and Frank was shot in the stomach. After a shootout, he managed to survive and had emergency surgery. After recovering, he was sent to a youth institution for a year. Frank would then be arrested again in 1961 for violating his parole and going on a fishing trip with a friend in Canada. In May 1962, he returned to Hapeville and found a job at Atlanta International Airport. The following month, he abducted a 4-year-old girl from a local bowling alley and sexually assaulted her in the nearby woods. He was then sentenced to serve 10 to 20 years at Georgia State Prison in Reidsville after being convicted of kidnapping and child molestation. In 1963, Frank was taken out for a medical errand, but he managed to escape and fled to Macon, where he would go on to rob over $6,000 from a branch of the Citizens and Southern National Bank. Again, he was arrested and convicted of robbery and was sentenced to the Federal Reformatory in Chillicothe, Ohio. He was later transferred back to the United States Penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, after a second escape attempt. While there, he was continuously raped by other inmates, which caused him to climb a roof of the prison and threaten to commit suicide. After being sent back to the Federal Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, he was sent back to Georgia State Prison in 1968, where he would befriend David Dale, a fellow inmate. Frank was released from prison in November 1972 and sent to a halfway house. A week after being released from the halfway house, on January 27, 1973, he approached a woman at the gas station, forced her into her car and attempted to grope and sexually assault her. The woman managed to escape and Frank was arrested. Frank convinced David, who had been released from prison, to post his bond, which would allow him to go on the run as a fugitive. For 17 years after, Frank failed to show up for his court on June 11, 1973, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. In 1974, using the name Brandon Williams, Frank met a woman named Sandy Chipman at a North Carolina truck stop. They dated for a month before getting married, making Frank a stepfather to Sandy's 4 children. He convinced Sandy to relocate her family to Dallas, Texas. Sandy was sentenced to 30 days in jail for passing bad checks in 1975. While she served her time, she left her children in the custody of Floyd, her husband. After she was released, she arrived home to find the residence vacated and her husband and children gone. Sandy eventually found her 2 middle daughters, Allison and Amy, in the care of a local church-operated social service group. She never found her older daughter, Suzanne, and her youngest son, Philip. The infant boy's whereabouts remain unknown. By 1989, Floyd, his purported wife Tonya Dawn Hughes, actually Suzanne Zavakis, who had also gone by the lion Sharon Marshall, and her infant son Michael Hughes were living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Tonya worked as a dancer at a strip club. A fellow dancer, Karen Parsley, encouraged Tonya to leave the demeaning Floyd, only for Tonya to claim that he would kill her and her child if she tried. Frank had joined the Fraternal Order of Police, despite not being a cop, and had told Tonya that he could use his connections to track her down. However, By April 1990, Tonya decided to run away with Kevin Brown, a college student she was having a secret relationship with, and taken her son Michael. That month, 3 passerbys found Tonya lying on the side of a highway 100 miles outside of Oklahoma. She was rushed to the Presbyterian Hospital in Oklahoma City with severe bruises and a large hematoma at the back of her skull. As she had been found with groceries scattered around her, police summarized that she had been struck from behind in a hit and run while walking from a convenience store to a nearby Motel 6. When Frank arrived at the hospital the following day, he claimed he had fallen asleep at the Motel 6 after Tonya had departed to collect the groceries. Both Frank and Sharon went by a number of names. At the time of her death, the couple were suspects in the 1989 disappearance of 18-year-old Cheryl Ann Cameso, a former co-worker of Sharon. Cheryl disappeared after an angry confrontation with Frank. Frank was considered the lead suspect in his wife's death as well. Following Sharon's death, Frank put her 2-year-old son Michael Hughes into a foster care and left the state. Michael's foster parents told authorities the boy had limited muscle control, was non-verbal and often experienced hysterical behaviour when he first arrived at the home, but he had made remarkable progress. In 1994, they began adoption proceedings. 6 months after Michael was placed in foster care, Frank was arrested on a parole violation. As part of an adoption process, Michael's DNA was compared to Frank's to establish paternity. It was discovered at the time that Frank was not Michael's biological father. When Frank was released from jail, he attempted to regain custody of Michael. On the basis of his criminal record and the discovery that he had no biological relation, his request was denied. On September 12, 1994, Michael was in the 1st grade at Indian Meridian Elementary School in Choctaw, Oklahoma. Frank walked into the school and forced Principal James Davis at gunpoint to take him to Michael's classroom. Frank then forced Michael and James into his pickup truck. Frank forced James out of the truck in a wooded area, handcuffed him to a tree and sped off with Michael. The principal survived the abduction and was rescued. 2 months later, Frank was arrested in Louisville, Kentucky. Michael was not with him and has not been seen since. Authorities have received conflicting reports as to what happened to Michael. Some witness statements detail alleged confessions from Frank regarding Michael's death. According to these reports, Frank reportedly told his sister and others that he drowned the child in a motel bathtub in Georgia shortly after the kidnapping. Another person claimed he saw Frank bury Michael's body in a cemetery. Other sources reported that Frank had stated that Michael was still alive and well, although Frank had refused to disclose exactly where Michael was and who was caring for him. In 2015, in an interview with the FBI, Frank admitted to killing Michael the same day of the kidnapping by shooting him twice in the back of the head. The investigation into the death of Sharon Marshall and the kidnapping of Michael uncovered more unsolved mysteries. It was discovered that Frank had raised Sharon as his daughter since her early childhood. DNA testing to determine her paternity uncovered that she was not Frank's biological daughter. Frank had given a number of inconsistent statements regarding how she came into his custody. One such story is that he had rescued Sharon when she was abandoned by her biological parents. The earliest known record of Sharon was her elementary school registration in an Oklahoma City school in 1975. She was registered under the alias Suzanne Davis. Authorities suspected that Marshall was born in the late 1960s and kidnapped by Frank sometime between 1973 and 1975. In October 2014, Sharon had been identified as Susan Marie Zavakis, a North Carolina child who had gone missing with Frank, her stepfather, in 1975. DNA matched the mother of Susan Zavakis to Sharon Marshall. Sharon's mother attempted to file kidnapping charges, but was told by the local authorities that, as Frank was the stepfather, he had the right to take the children. Sharon Marshall graduated from high school in Forest Park, Georgia in 1986. She was a good student who earned a full scholarship to Georgia Institute of Technology to study aerospace engineering. Despite this, she did not go to college and instead moved to Tampa, Florida with Frank, where she gave birth to a son in 1988. Sharon began working as an exotic dancer and married Frank in 1989 in New Orleans. The couple used the aliases Clarence Marcus Hughes and Tonya Dawn Tadlock. Cheryl's 1989 disappearance remained unsolved until her skeletal remains were found in 1995 by a landscaper in an area off Interstate 275 in Pinellas County, Florida. She was listed as a Jane Doe until a year later, when the remains were identified. An anthropologist determined that she had died from beating and 2 gunshots to the head. Frank and Sharon had been persons of interest in the case after co-workers witnessed an altercation between Frank and Cheryl. Frank accused Cheryl of reporting Sharon for mistaking her income, which subsequently resulted in Sharon's losing her government benefit. The argument occurred outside the club where Sharon and Cheryl worked as exotic dancers. A co-worker reported that Frank punched Cheryl in the face. Frank and Sharon fled to Oklahoma shortly after Cheryl disappeared, and the trailer was burned to the ground in what was ruled intentional arson. In March 1995, a mechanic in Kansas found a large envelope stuffed between the truck bed and the top of the gas tank of a truck he had recently purchased at an auction. He found 97 photographs in the envelope, including many photos of a woman who had been bound and severely beaten. The police tracked the truck to Frank, who had stolen the truck in Oklahoma in September 1994, but had abandoned it in Texas the following month. Investigators compared the photographs of the injured woman with Cheryl, as well as evidence found with her remains, and found that the clothing in the photographs was similar. The medical examiner also compared injuries seen in the photograph to the cheekbone of Cheryl's skull and found that they were consistent. Many of the pictures contained images of furniture and other belongings identified as belonging to that of Frank. He was tried and convicted for Cheryl's murder on the basis of the photographic evidence found in the truck. The investigation into the kidnapping of Michael Anthony Hughes, as well as the earlier kidnapping of his mother, are ongoing. Other photographs found in the truck show sexual abuse of Sharon starting very early in the childhood. Authorities found photos of her in sexually explicit poses at various ages, starting around age 4. In September 2014, Frank admitted to the murder of Michael Hughes and had disposed of his body on Interstate 35. A search of the area yielded no results, and police presume that wild hogs may have eaten Michael's body. In 2001, while awaiting trial for Cheryl's murder, Judge Nancy Lee ruled out that Frank was incompetent to stand trial and ordered for him to undergo further medical evaluation. Frank fought against this assessment, asserting that he was competent. Several months later, the judge reversed her previous ruling and ordered him to stand trial. He was later convicted and sentenced to death.